All right, everyone, welcome back. So our 2023-2024 season previews continue on once again today with the Minnesota Wild. And the Wild are quite an interesting team because obviously they've been first-round exits for the past couple of years in a row. And really, they still have 2 more years left of paying Parise and Sutter, and then that's over, or at least it's a little bit less money than usual. And yeah, that's really affecting them right now, honestly. It's affecting them from making moves, and it's affecting them from having a solid roster, and it's a problem. So they only have 2 more years of that this season and next season. But regardless, let's look at last season for us before we start previewing into this season. In 22-23, they went 46, 25, and 11 for 103 points. They were 11th in the NHL, and they lost in round one to the Dallas Stars. Obviously, in the regular season, they had a really good year during that. And the second half of the season was great for him. Philip Gustafsson went on an amazing run, and then they just cooled off against Dallas. That's really what happened. And they're not there yet, in my opinion, to be a cup contending team. And honestly, going back to the Parise and Sutter contracts, that's really what's stopping them, if I'm being honest. If you get that 14 mil, that gives you a lot of options to make other moves too. And they are a pretty young team. They're building up a pretty decent prospect pool. So it's not like they're like old and bad. They're still building up a pretty young pool, but they have some guys in there. They're just going to be a weird team probably for the next 2 years still, if I'm being honest. You look at your departures and your arrivals. Your departures, you got Matt Dumba, John Klingberg, Oscar Sundquist, Gustav Nyquist, Ryan Reeves, and Sam Steele. So you look at those guys. Matt Dumba's been on the team for forever. It's going to be weird seeing him in Arizona. It's going to be very, very strange. But regardless, yeah, he's an Arizona Coyote. John Klingberg, Sundquist, and Nyquist were all deadline acquisitions. It really felt like when they got those guys, it was quantity over quality. And that's really what I saw in, getting those guys. And none of them really performed well in the first round of the playoffs, so it was kind of pointless. But regardless, they are now off the books. Ryan Reeves was a solid fighter. They pretty much replaced him. But anyways, and then Sam Steele was like a bottom six player, nothing more than that really during this season. Their arrival was just a Ryan Reeves replacement. It's Pat Maroon. Maroon from Tampa, not a bad acquisition. Can be a fourth line grit guy, will fight. So yeah, not a bad guy there whatsoever to have on your roster. Not terrible. I mean, he is getting up there in age. So you look at your lineups here now via the Hockey News. You got your top six: Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Matt Zuccarello is your first line. Then you got Marcus Johansson, Ryan Hartman, and Matthew Boldy as your second line. So relatively young. Kaprizov's young, Eriksson Ek's young, Boldy's young. The rest of that, there are guys there that are kind of aging a little bit. But still, not a bad top six regardless. Still will be a really good regular season team, probably around where they were this past year. Finishing probably around like third in the division is where I likely see them placing. The bottom six is where it gets interesting. Brandon Duhaime, Frederick Gaudreau, and Marcus Foligno. Then you got Pat Maroon, Marco Rossi, and Sam Walker, not Sean Walker or Nathan Walker. It's a completely different Walker. So that I thought was interesting. But regardless, not a bad bottom six. Rossi going to get another chance here to prove himself after a pretty yikes season last year when he played up with Minnesota. But in Iowa, he looked good. So hopefully this year is another step in his development. Foligno, Gaudreau, Duhaime, solid third line. I like that third line, actually. Some underrated players there who did play decently well on Minnesota this past year for sure. And then that fourth line, we'll see how Rossi does. Some extra skaters. You got Adam Beckman, Connor Duar, and Nick Patan will filter in throughout the season, I expect, and will play some games for sure. Your defense, I'd say it's pretty good. It's still relatively young, and there are some spots where it's like, but it's still a pretty solid defense. First pairing, Jacob Middleton and Jared Spurgeon. Jonas Brodin and Kalen Addison. Second pairing, and then Goligoski and Faber as your third pairing. So, obviously, they're a good pairing in the first. Spurgeon and Middleton. Brodin and Addison, obviously, a good pairing. Kalen Addison still needs to be signed. Still has a relatively good... is still relatively young. He was even in trade rumors there for a little bit, which I thought was interesting. But regardless... Brock Faber going to make his first full NHL season. Played, I think, like 2 games last year with Minnesota when the season ended. Should probably fit in that third pairing for his start. Then they got Lambos and Spacek there as some extra guys there, some young players. Could make the jump into the NHL, but of course, we'll find out. In your goaltending, you got Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury. Then you got Jesper Wallstedt there as an additional player. I talked about this in the prospect pool overview for the Wild. The timeline expected for Gustafsson and Fleury. Fleury's likely going to be done in 1 to 2 years. That's what's expected. This could be Fleury's last season in the NHL. And then after Fleury leaves, Wallstedt's going to come in. That's probably the expected timeline, and is what I see happening. But regardless, that is your goaltending tandem. Hopefully Gustafsson can have another good year. Wild fans were saying he's like a top 10 goalie. I'm a little bit on that right now. I'd say he's around like 10 or 11 if we're talking this season. I had him ranked 18th mainly because I was basing off the last 2 seasons. But, Gustafsson played a good half a season with the Wild. We'll see how he does in a full season, likely playing a tandem role with Fleury. But, of course, we'll find out. The biggest X factor, I'd say, is depth. But I'm not too worried about the depth. Honestly, I think the bottom 6 is okay. But honestly, that fourth line is going to be some concern. We'll see how Rossi does. We'll see how Walker does. Duhaime as well. So there's a lot of things that are to be expected out of those guys in that bottom 6. The biggest question, and it's going to be the question I'm probably going to ask next year, if I'm being honest, unless if we see a surprise. Can they get out of the first round? That is really the biggest question. Now, this year, in the regular season at least, there was some promise, but it still wasn't that good of an outcome when it mattered the most. So, honestly, that is what I look at. I would expect for them to probably be better, a little bit better this coming year. But honestly, I'm not entirely too sure. And just again, going back to that Parise and Sutter contracts, like you really can't do anything with them in there. Like that's 14 mil just taken off the books. But they needed to get them out of there. That was needed. But regardless, 2 more years of that. That's all I'm gonna say. Your point projections per the Hockey News' fantasy guide, so I didn't make these. Don't come at me. You have got Kirill Kaprizov leading the way with 100 points. Matt Zuccarello with 78. Matthew Boldy with 69. Eriksson Ek with 61. And Hartman with 55. So not bad there. Kaprizov leading the way. That should be what it is. Boldy could have a solid 70, 75-point season. That's what I could see out of him for sure. Sleeper or your bust is actually Marc-Andre Fleury, which I thought was very interesting. Surely this must be the swan song for Marc-Andre Fleury, who turns 39 in November. Father Time is undefeated. A well-decorated veteran has posted a save percentage below 9.9 in 3 of the past 4 seasons. At best, he'll probably split duties with Gustafsson. And again, that's probably what's going to happen. They'll either play a tandem or Gustafsson's going to be the starter. Fleury is expected to be the backup this coming season, and it's likely going to be his last year, if we're being honest. That's really what I see there out of Minnesota. So, yeah, playoffs, yeah, they're a playoff team. They're not like a playoff winning team, but they're a playoff team, if that makes any sense. Just right now, I can't see it. But when those young guys start coming into the lineup more, and other guys they've selected, Ogren, Stremel, other guys like that on the roster, Urov, those guys start coming in, that's when they'll be pretty solid. So, yeah. Honestly, another 2 more years of the Wild playing like this, and then I think in a few more years, they'll be a really, really good team. But regardless, thank y'all for watching. For Sports, I really do appreciate it. The next preview is the San Jose Sharks, I believe. I'm looking at my standings correctly. But anyways, thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Adios.